And in the Canadian Football League, it's been anything but quiet this week as we get set for Week 11. And with that, we welcome in the CFL on TSN's. And TSN's Farhan Lalji joins us here on a Wednesday. Wild week, wild day yesterday, Farhan. Have you had a chance to sit down between probably requests from every media market in the country?
It's been busy. There's no doubt. Even I've got to go to Calgary tonight for the game tomorrow, and I had to push my flight back so I could be at the Lions practice today before flying out. So there's been a lot going on. The one thing about Nathan Rourke is his ability to move the needle across the country. And I go back to 2022, and even in our own newsroom at TSN, which is full of 40-somethings that maybe were part of the lost CFL generation in Southern Ontario. Nathan Rourke, they wanted constant information on and constant updates on. And this is when he was in the CFL, before he was even trying out for the NFL. And I've had coaches around the league say, look, he's the one guy that sells tickets in every market, not just a home market. So a lot of attention. I mean, on a day that would have been a big news day anyway, because the Elks got sold. Kenny Lawler, arguably the best receiver in the league, is coming back. What's happening with Trey Ford on the injury front this weekend? And all of that got pushed to the side because Nathan Rourke shocked everyone and signed to come back to the CFL.
Trevor Harris is coming back. Jeremiah Masoli is going to play. Bo Levi got benched. This is all happening within like 4 or 5 days. This is what the league needs, though, because it is in the news and in the headlines.
Yeah, and every market's got something to talk about, and that's a cool thing. I mean, even if you're in Calgary, you probably have some interest in what's happening with Bo, and if you're in, Winnipeg, you have some interest in what's going on with your rival. So, yeah, you're 100% right? Like there's a lot to chew on there. Hamilton would have interest in what's happening with Masoli because of the time he had there as well. So everybody's got something, and on the Rourke front too. I think every team, and I've said this before, would have had interest in him. So I think every team was taken aback a bit because I believe in the offseason they were all interested in making some form of pitch or at least asking the question on his availability. So a lot to talk about across the league yesterday. And that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and forget about Montreal, off to their best start in 20 years too. But with Rourke, did this just come, how did this come about? Straight from Atlanta to BC, I assume that there wasn't a conversation with other CFL markets.
No, happened very quickly. I think there was an initial conversation after he got released from the Giants and cleared waivers for a day before signing with the Falcons. And, I would imagine that there was some background work done, but I also think there was an understanding on the part of the Lions that Nathan was going to do everything in his power to stay in the NFL for this season. And, he felt really good about his chances of sticking with the Falcons, at least in a number 3 capacity for the rest of the year. There was enough other interest league-wide that I think he felt very good that there would be a way for him, and I talked to him during that period, and I certainly thought that's where it was going to go. I wasn't a fan of his decision to go to the Falcons, right? Just given what's in that quarterback room, that, there were 2 big names in front of him. But I certainly think there was a path for him to beat out Taylor Heineke and get the 3. So I'm not really sure what happened there. I don't think it's easy enough to say 3 of 13 in the game because a lot of drops, and Taylor Heineke's record at that point wasn't really good either, right? Like in terms of that game. So I think there's something else going on there. And I think all of that, the way things went down in Atlanta and New York, I think probably created a bit of a tipping point for Nathan because I could see him being pretty annoyed or disillusioned with that process, which looked different than last year's process. And talking to him, he said that there was the opportunity path in 2023 looked like it was a lot better than what was trending in 2024. So there were some other teams that were interested, but he could tell that it was just as a camp arm. He wasn't interested in that, knew he needed a play, and it was a very fast decision, right? There were no conversations with other.
Second, you let me know if we get him back in here. I'm guessing you got a phone call or a text came through, and yeah, bring him back in. I appreciate you ignoring the call or the text that came in.
I know. I apologize for that coming in. But anyway, I just and it's my bosses at TSN, so you know how important you are, Clark.
Wow.
But yeah, once that tipping point occurred, It happened very quickly. There were no conversations with other teams. This is where he wanted to be. It's what he considers home. He bought a house here, back in January, and it was quick. They got it done, and there was no way the Lions were going to pass on the chance to get him back long term.
You talked about, this year being a much different situation in the NFL for him and the process than a year ago. Does that process get more difficult year by year if he wants to go back, or is it an ebb and flow with every quarterback class?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat of an ebb and flow, and I say that because, you could say, okay, go back next year, like rip it up this year. If the Lions happen to win a Grey Cup and he's the MOP, you can go circle back. In my opinion, I think that would be a bad play. And look, I'm a guy that wants it to work for him in the NFL. I'm disappointed more than thrilled that he's coming back because of what I believe of this player. That said, I think he needs to breathe a little bit. And this is, again, just my opinion. I think he needs to breathe a little bit from being a quarterback that got cut twice in 2 weeks, right? Because if he goes back in December and goes through the process, it's too close to his last process, in my opinion. If he were to just wait one more year after the 2025 season and then go through that process at that point, assuming that he does well in both years, which I certainly believe he will, then enough distance has passed that you can kind of rebrand yourself a little bit, that you're removed from that, being cut 2 times in 2 weeks in 2024 preseason and training camp. So I would think that would be the better course of action, but I do believe he's going to take another run at it at some point, as every CFL player has the opportunity to do after every season.
Last one on Nathan and the NFL stuff. How much, fit is such a big deal. You mentioned Atlanta maybe not being the best fit. How much does CFL ties matter in him getting a shot like Marcus Brady or Kerry Joseph in Chicago, things like that? Does that play a factor?
Yeah, I think it does. Like if you're in a building where people understand the league and have a high level of respect for the league, I think that absolutely matters. And they were one of those teams that you talked about where I spoke to one of the coaches after that, and it was basically really quick. And they asked me what happened and that they were really interested in him and that they were going to make some calls. And that was the day before he signed to come back to the Lions, right? So timing is everything and fit is everything. And look, we can sit here and everyone will say, oh, you're just making excuses. Ultimately, he couldn't make it work for 4 teams. And that's not necessarily accurate because when he got released by Jacksonville, it was just to send him back to the practice roster. He didn't get cut as in cut outright. It was just more, he had gone back and forth off active and PR 3 times that year, and they were just looking to do that again. But it matters. And I say that because I just went through 5 NFL training camps on the West Coast. And all of those teams were giving their 3rd string quarterback, and in some cases their 4th string quarterback, meaningful reps in practice. I was at the Chargers, and Casey Bauman, who's actually technically Canadian in terms of status and draft here, even though he's never lived here, he was a 4th stringer with the Chargers and got at least 10 reps in team periods every day the day I was there, and then even more when Justin Herbert first got cut. Right. Whereas the Giants weren't giving their 3rd they weren't giving him much opportunity, let alone Rourke, who was at that time their 4th. The Falcons, who were trying to give him a chance to compete for 3, didn't give him any reps for 4 or for 5 days in practice. So it is strange. It varies so much from team to team, and a lot of it comes down to the cachet and security of their coach. Right. I've made the point that Brock Purdy was 1 pick away from being Nathan Rourke, right? He was the last pick in the draft. So he was 1 pick away from being an undrafted free agent. And he goes to the Niners camp, and Kyle Shanahan has a ton of juice in that organization, influence, sway, power. And he could see after giving him reps that, boy, you know what? My best quarterback is that number is our 3rd guy or our 4th guy. And he can go to his GM and say, you know what? Like the guy that you traded 3 first-round picks for ain't as good as this guy. We should probably figure this out. And they do. But, who has Kyle Shanahan level of power? Certainly not Brian Daboll in New York, who's, probably on his last year. If the quarterback situation doesn't work out, which it won't. So fit matters so much to your question.
Yeah, I agree. The fit is a big deal. To the contract. It's a big contract for Nathan, but some of the questions are coming in. Everybody wants this marketing money explained. So what's your best way to explain the $200,000 he can earn as a marketing side of it?
Well, it's perfectly fine, legal, and has been used by other teams. We just haven't talked about it as much because deals haven't hovered in this range. Hamilton has used it on players. When you look at Brady Oliveira and Dalton Schoen both signing, marketing money was a factor there. And this is on the books. This isn't illegal money, right? This is money that there was a rule created in 2003 in the last CBA that basically allowed for marketing money. Now, the unfortunate part of it is that there's no cap on it. Now, I do think that'll change in the offseason, but there's currently no cap on it. So you can take a certain amount of money and allocate it to marketing for a player that is on the contract, perfectly legal and transparent, but it doesn't count against the cap. And again, we're talking about it now, but believe me, it's not the first time it's being used. Chad Kelly has a similar number in his contract attached to marketing, right? Now, I'll be honest with you. I think that Nathan Rourke is probably the only person in the league who could justify that level of marketing and be legitimate about it. Like if other players or if other teams are using it, it's just nudge, nudge, wink, wink to get the money paid. And I shouldn't even say it because I don't want to make it sound dishonest because it's not. But in Nathan's case, believe me, he can move the needle in a meaningful way to make that stuff happen. So so you can allow it. Now, the cynic would say, well, then any team should do that and spend all that kind of money depending on your ownership level. And they could, but it would be irresponsible, right? They could, if you do that, we're going to be back to a point where, it's CFL salaries won't be sustainable for ownership to even come close to making a profit, right? So I do think they need to put some guardrails around it, limit the number of players whose contracts can be attached to it, limit the numbers on it. I do think that because there's just not a meaningful enough player that could actually move the needle, even in their own market, let alone other markets. But I certainly believe Nathan is one of those guys where the Lions can be legitimate. I mean, like I said, you mark my words, even if it doesn't happen this week, within 2 home games for BC, within 2 home games at the most, they're going to make back his salary for 2024. Like, it's going to happen. So why wouldn't you if you were that team, right? Whereas what other player could actually do that in market?
Instantly, it's the game of the week. We're all going to be watching on Sunday because we want to see him play. I mean, it's fantastic and really fascinating. There's so much more. I wanted to ask you about these NFL rookie quarterbacks, but I can't leave without asking you about Vernon Adams and how this leaves VA.
Yeah, I think short term they want to be as respectful to VA as possible. Now, look, I'm not naive enough to think they're bringing Nathan Rourke back and he doesn't have an opportunity to be the starter the rest of the season. But I think they truly want to take it on a game-by-game basis, right? They're not looking to move VA to get off the cap this year and to make it all work. I think they, like Rick Campbell genuinely loves Vernon Adams and believes he's an incredible teammate. And the first person they talked to was VA. And I think the team feels the same way. And quite honestly, I talked to a couple of players yesterday, and they were kind of like, I'm kind of conflicted because, maybe they didn't play with Nathan in 2022, and they just love the teammate that VA has become. So they're not necessarily down. They kind of don't know how to feel in this moment. But I will tell you this. I texted with VA yesterday, and his response was nothing short of incredible. Like, I won't read the text off to you, but the humility, understanding, class, and professionalism that he gave me in that conversation, which was off the record. He knew I wasn't going to publish any of it. Unbelievable, right? Like incredible. And it shows you the growth of this man, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. So I think he'll handle it right. I don't think it'll be a divided locker room, but there'll be a process there. And I don't think they'll be afraid to turn to VA. So I don't think the decision has been made in terms of what they're going to do once VA is healthy. I think many of us can see the writing on the wall with the salary, but I think they want to treat him well and be fair and reasonable. But then I do think in the offseason, a move is going to have to happen, right? So I think the only way VA can stay in the offseason is because, let's say Nathan decides to try the NFL this offseason, which I think, again, would be a mistake. But then at that point, if I'm the Lions, I want VA. But if Nathan decides to stay 1 more year or before going through that process again, then I think the Lions would try to do right by VA, and they certainly couldn't sustain both salaries either. And I think there would be a ton of interest in VA. I've said before that if Nathan was available to the open market in the offseason, 9 teams would have cleared the decks for him. And in VA's case, I think 6 teams would be very, very interested in him, including the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Yeah, I agree. Should be very interesting to follow, and Sunday will be a lot of fun for sure. Farhan, enjoy the rest of the week, man, and appreciate your time.
All right, take care, my friend.
All right, Farhan Lalji, TSN, joining us here.